if Canada removes the unilateral unjustified tariffs on Chinese products, China will also reciprocate accordingly. And if the EV tariffs are removed, then China will also remove the tariffs on the relevant products of Canada.
Those exclusive comments to CTV News over the weekend from China's ambassador to Canada are sparking lots of political reaction just days ahead of Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand's visit to China later this week. While some premiers, like Scott Moe and Wab Kinew, want to see Canada's EV tariffs on China lifted to provide relief to the canola sector. Those are some letters you're looking at that they wrote the Prime Minister directly. Ontario's Premier Doug Ford does not want the levies to go anywhere. Take a listen.
I had a conversation the other day. Scott called me up and said, "Hey, I got to protect my product." I get it. I get why Wab Kinew and Scott are saying, you know, drop the tariffs. But I have to do the same thing, and I respect their sector. They ship about $4.9 billion to China on canola. Well, look at our auto sector. It's 157,000 workers, direct jobs, indirect. Multiply that by 4 times. We've seen over $46 billion of new investments. So I respect what they're doing, but there's no damn way we should drop tariffs on China, I'll tell you that.
So how does the Prime Minister navigate this one? Our front bench is back. Dan Moulton, Larissa Waller, Tom Mulcair, and Laura Stone. Larissa, I'll start with you on this one. And I should point out to our audience, this is a very heavily weighted to Ontario panel. So keep that in mind. I worked in Saskatchewan, Alberta, so I'll try to voice that perspective. And Tom, of course, is joining us from Quebec. This is going to be an interesting one. My anticipation is that the Prime Minister will meet President Xi on the sidelines of APAC as soon as that, so just a few weeks from now. Do you think ultimately, like when he's weighing this out, there have to be political considerations, particularly on the domestic front?
Sure, and I also think they wouldn't allow they being the Prime Minister's staff and the Chinese political staff wouldn't allow for a meeting unless there was some pre-negotiated outcome that they can point to show that the meeting was fruitful. But at the end of the day, the Prime Minister has to weigh a lot of other things beyond how important canola is to the Canadian economy, and it is our #1 export that we grow, but it is not our #1 export, and he's a dollar and cents guy. The Prime Minister has to weigh what's our #1 export, who was our #1 trading partner. That is still the United States. It doesn't matter that we're in a bit of a tense relationship there, and I appreciate also that the Prime Minister is playing the relationship game with Donald Trump. So both on our own domestic kind of economic factoring side, but also in the world where we don't want to tick off the U.S. president who has his own contentious relationship with China, we can't afford to drop those tariffs. But I do think that the Prime Minister and fellow premiers are going to give, again, each other a little bit of grace to advocate for their constituencies and advocate for what they really need. But at the end of the day, the auto sector is too important, and so is our relationship with the United States.
Do you ever expect the Prime Minister, Dan, to be that frank if that's ultimately the decision he makes?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister's political considerations, first and foremost, need to be to satisfy a voter demand for some more calm and less friction in our trading relationship with the United States. I think that's where voters need to see progress, and I think that's where the Prime Minister is going to look to deliver it first. I agree with Larissa. I doubt that the Prime Minister would be having that high stakes of a meeting without some sense of what's going to come out on the other side of it. But I think the key factor that the Prime Minister's office is considering is if there were any movements in our trade relationship with China, how will it impact ongoing negotiations with the White House and our trading relationship with the United States? And if decisions we make on the Chinese front are going to create more turbulence or more friction on our trading relationship with the United States, I highly doubt that they'll be taken.
Herein, though, Tom, we have another point of friction, right? Because on the one hand, we want to expand our trading relationship with other countries because of what's going on with the United States. And China, given its market size, is really the only country that can come close to supplanting the U.S. Not that it necessarily will, but that, you know, offers that opportunity. At the same time, the U.S. under Donald Trump, just like under Joe Biden, treats China as an adversary for many of the reasons that the auto sector representatives on our program earlier laid out, right? Unfair trading practices, national security concerns. So doing something that's offside with the U.S. when it comes to China could also present complications. So how do you square that circle if you're the Prime Minister?
I agree with you. It could also produce complications, but it also might open the eyes of the Americans to the simple fact that they can't always have it their own way. Prior to Donald Trump's re-election, Canada chose to put itself in lockstep with the Americans in imposing 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. Now, there's been a lot of retroactive explanation that there was this much government investment and there was a reason for it. It wasn't a heck of a lot of reason for it, other than the fact that that's what the Americans were doing, and they asked us to do the same. You know, at some point, we've got to ask ourselves whether we keep doing the bidding of a country that has said in so many words, and it was Howard Lutnick who said it last week, that they want to clobber the Canadian auto industry. So does that industry keep holding out its withered hand to the vivisectionist, or do Canadians look at this situation and say it's got to mean something when Prime Minister Carney says he wants to establish new trade routes, new trading partners? So I think that we do have to have a very serious look as to whether or not it got us anything other than a smack in the head from the Americans when we did their bidding and we imposed these 100% tariffs, and whether it makes any sense to keep them there, because what we got is not only the smack from the Americans, but massive tariffs from the Chinese as retaliation against one of our key agricultural sectors. I think that Carney, of course, and Dominic LeBlanc, they're dealing with a whole bunch of things at the same time, and I guess a certain amount of abnegation is required. But I think at some point, Canada has to realize that we can't keep being the sucker in this game. And I think that Trump and Lutnick are playing Canada for suckers right now. They think that they could just keep imposing tariffs, and we'll keep helping them by keeping out Chinese electric vehicles at the expense, quite literally, of the Canadian automobile consumer. I think that those things have to be on the table with eyes wide open. If we're talking about new trading partners and new trading routes to deal with the fact that the Americans are going down this path, then we should give some serious consideration to simply lifting those tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. I think that a lot of Canadians would be really happy if we were to do that. I know that consumers in Great Britain loved it, and as I heard the representative of the Canadian auto manufacturers before, the same thing happened in Mexico. And I think that we're not giving ourselves a fair shake when we keep saying, oh, well, keep trying to get something out of the Americans, because all that's gotten us so far is grief.
Although those same representatives in the auto sector, the Premier of Ontario, Laura, who you covered today, is very interested in defending, those would be the group of people, and Tom's right to point out that there's a lot of Canadians who don't see the intended impact of these tariffs, but that sector continues to argue for their effectiveness, particularly at a time. I think it's fair to say, like a year and a half ago, both the Ontario and federal governments were saying this was the future industrial policy for our country. Electric vehicles and associated parts, we're going to subsidize those industries ourselves, we're going to build them up. Clearly, the competitive environment with the U.S. has changed things. The policies in the U.S. have changed things. And they're at an even more vulnerable point now than they were before. How do you think that ultimately impacts? I know where Premier Ford stands, but how do you think that ultimately impacts what the Prime Minister does?
Well, I mean, it's quite a conundrum, to be quite honest, right? I mean, he's got to balance all these different priorities. And as Tom rightly pointed out, we do have to diversify our trade. We're getting punched in the gut by our closest ally on a daily basis. And I think, this whole episode does raise questions for the Canadian public of why Canada is aligning itself with the United States on its auto policy when, officials are openly saying they don't want us to succeed. They essentially don't want Canada to have an auto industry. The stakes are also extremely high for Premier Doug Ford, who has made a big gamble on the EV industry, as you said, Vashi, as the future of the auto industry in Ontario, and has poured tens of millions of dollars, and along with the federal government, billions into this industry. And so, all of these factors do have to be balanced by the Prime Minister. But I think, the key here to me, I think, is the C word, compromise. I think you can see, Anita and Foreign Minister traveling to China, this talk of the Prime Minister meeting with the top Chinese officials. I mean, this all signals, I think, to Canadians that we are going to have to find a compromise with these countries where we've had frosty relations, India, China, and others, in the face of this new relationship with the United States, and come to some sort of compromise that works for everyone. And maybe everyone has to put a bit of water in their wine here, because we're not going to satisfy everyone, but maybe people can, premiers and provinces are going to have to find a balance that they can live with here that doesn't, punish certain sectors or certain provinces fully in the way that we're seeing right now.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Great discussion. Appreciate your time on this Tuesday. Dan Moulton, Larissa Waller, Tom Mulcair, and Laura Stone, our wonderful front bench panel.